move on to individual poets or other aspects of Sindhi literature, we turn to these scholars to understand, scholars and a translator to understand what is it that we should know about the Sindhi ecosystem, what is it that we should know about Sindhi identity. And both of them have been very prolific authors, scholars, I mean, in terms of their different projects that one cannot keep track of. They are here to tell us, give us an overview, can you give us an understanding of the different entry points to the subject, right? So Rita Kothari, of course, when I first came across Unbordered Memories, and I don't know, cursing who, because the point was, why did it have to come out after I did my MPhil? It's an anthology of translated short stories, but at that point of time, the burden of refuge was also looming large in the minds of people who thought, wait, knowledge can be produced about Sindhi, and what is Sindhi? Nandita is, of course, very well, recognized for exile. I mean, it happens, one book just sticks on you. You may have done several other things, but exile is what people tend to talk about. And of course, she's written a lot of other scholarly articles as well, and non-scholarly articles as well, and cinema. She's also written about Jai Hind College, right? So there are many things that we can learn from. There are many things that we can engage with these scholars on, and I think with that as a context, we can begin the session, right? Yeah. Okay. So I invite you to deliver your opening remarks of what you have done so far and how it speaks to the theme of, or the lens of, fragmentation of identity.
How do we see our journey so far, and what does it, I think the question is, what does it actually even mean to be a Sindhi? When you are bereft of your land, when the language begins to wane over generations, when a 65-year-old poet is introduced as an emerging new voice in Sindhi literature, clearly you can see there is something that's diminishing. That's something here that's waning, and even of what exists, it remains so eclipsed by a set of historical circumstances, by the fact that we are a linguistic minority, but it is language that we first gave upon, or language gave upon us, whichever way we want to see it. So I think it is a strange sort of a predicament. And compounded by this is the fact that people even today don't quite know who Sindhis are. Right? And I think it is the mark of a minority discourse that every time you talk about something, you almost begin from the most basic fundamentals of things. It's almost like you can't have a mid-conversation, that there has to be a primer, and then we can start having a conversation. And I find that extremely painful. I mean, I work with many languages, not only Sindhi, and I can't take for granted the fact that भैया हमारे पास भाषा है, हिस्ट्री है हमारे पास, वहीं से शुरुआत करें, हम आपको बता देंगे. Do we begin to tell you that, by the way, we exist, hello, and I want to go to the more ontological and epistemological question of what does being mean? When do we know that you exist? Do we know we exist because there is a recognition somewhere? Because someone else recognizes you as Sindhi? Is that when we know that we are one? Where is that feedback coming from? And I think I feel like I want to go to those questions in some sense, and ask this question of what is the relationship between words and being.
When you said just now, you're talking about epistemological ways of looking, my first immediate response to that was that I would be a Sindhi regardless. whether I'm recognized or not. But where again does that come from? And I think for me, the answer is memory. You know. But coming back to what Sony had asked, in terms of Fragmented Selves, which is actually the title of this talk, and which actually emerged from a preliminary conversation which Rita and I had. For me personally, growing up, I grew up with very little sense of being Sindhi. And in that sense, I'm very envious actually of both Rita and Sony, who grew up in Sindhi speaking houses or neighborhoods and so on. So, and this I think was very much part of being part of an Amil family, an Amil background, which was very consciously westernized, not only after partition, but even before. Okay, I think we lay a bit too much blame at the dawn of partition. There were things and trends and developments that had started even before in Sindh itself. So, when I started this work, it was with a very fractured sense of being Sindhi. One of our respected playwrights, and I know Rita also learned the script along the way, yeah. And I think, for me, just yesterday somebody was asking me, what do you do? And I said, I'm a researcher and writer. And I've said this before and I really believe it. I'm far more of a researcher than a writer. And for me, that research into Sindhi history or Sindhi culture, Sindhi literature, whatever, that has been my way of, in a sense, undoing or discovering the fractured self. It has been bringing various parts of my where my Sindhi identity is concerned, not talking about other parts of myself. But it's been about discovering that game-changing trip. It was a life-changing trip, because again we're talking about the fractured self, or fractured selves, and in that journey of 1 month where I met a variety of Sindhi people, I met Sindhi Muslims, Sindhi Hindus living in Pakistan, or even Sindhi tribals who were living in the Thar area, or a whole gamut of Sindhi people, not just urban Sindhi Hindus from India, going far beyond that. So I felt my sense of being Sindhi expanded. It also evoked in me a great, I won't say curiosity, I would say hunger to know more about Sindhi history, So all that together really, I would say, filled the vacuum that was inside myself. And that is actually, that has helped me understand my sense of fractured Sindhi identity and also to do something about it.
And in fact, that's the reason why this was the opening question, because to understand the language would be what is Sindhi. To continue from what Rita was saying, I have been talking about Sindhi language in various forums, and I kept on saying Sindhi, Sindhi, Sindhi again and again, and this gentleman at the end of it kept on saying Sandhi, 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 Sandhi. And I had to, and this is despite the fact that Sindh and Punjab, Sindh and Gujarat are spoken of in the same breath. But I had to tell him, listen, for this last 1 hour you heard me incorrect. It was not Sandhi, it is Sindhi, right? So I totally get what you are saying about the fact that I could not even take for granted the word Sindhi to be registered in someone's mind. Yeah, so that's which is why, any conversation, I have to begin somewhere, so this was the starting point, but any conversation takes you 4 steps back. It makes you question all your, assumptions and everything, because you want to know, hey, you are saying this, but I'm confused, what about this, right? Okay, but the other part that I really liked in what Nandita said was this idea that scholarship, research is a way of coming to terms with who you are, understanding who you are, and that is where the, very painful task of translation, researching, getting to know, knowledge question, all of these come together. because even if, you know, I grew up in a Sindhi household, I grew up in a Sindhi wedding, how do we make sense of that? Yeah, so thank you for, you know, bringing up all of these things, which actually speaking, there is a no neat way to bring in. Yeah, and we should move on and see what are these other things that, you know, come in when we continue to speak of Sindhi identity. How do you think your Sindhi researchers, non-Sindhi researchers, that would be, you know, lovely to hear about.
Yeah. So, where the making of exile is concerned, honestly, that when the book was published, it really took me by surprise, because I would have been happy with maybe a couple of book reviews. But I think perhaps the publishers did a good job of marketing it. But it was very, very heartwarming, you know, to see a response from not only Sindhis but even non-Sindhis, you know, and within the Sindhi community from Sindhis of different age groups, you know. There was one person whom I interviewed for the book, and when he received the book, he messaged me he emailed me the next morning saying he started reading at 10 a.m. and this is a 80-year-old guy, okay. He started just reading a few pages and he couldn't put the book down until 1 at night, you know. I've had other people say, maybe more of my generation, who said that it has helped them understand their parents the way it helped me understand mine. You know, so that's also been very heartwarming. Or other Pakistani Muslims, you know. So that was my attempt at any rate, you know. So it was very gratifying to see that. So, and here I'd say that my book actually falls, in my opinion, between two stools. My work, because it is not academic. I don't think it's serious enough to be called academic, or would not conform to academic norms, and yet at the same time a little too serious to be general reading. So.
There's sometimes a lot of echo I want to avoid. Is there a lot of echo? It's okay? Yeah. Oh, I see. I'm like hearing so much echo. Yeah. I don't know. I'm sorry. This question about whether we always know whether our work is received well, whether it has traveled. I think we never really fully know. We do know partially. Sometimes it feels like sending out some balloons in the sky, and one is happy if they've landed somewhere. But sometimes you would think that, of course, this person would know, you know. They're working on this, they would acknowledge you simply documenting the partition experience of the Sindhi community. The argument was about forms of surrogate hatred. So if somebody reminds you of, to an upper caste Hindu, if someone reminds you of being a Muslim, even if she or he is not a Muslim, it can evoke your hatred or disgust. There are forms of proxy and surrogate forms of hatred that are sometimes that can't be reduced only to Hindu versus Muslim. And I think the Sindhis have suffered as a result of this. And I do believe that we tend to overemphasize the Hindu versus Muslim conflict without actually taking account of the fact that even those Hindus who do not subscribe to very textualized forms of living as Hindus can also be dealt with contempt. And I think that I believe that was my main work, anchored itself upon a specific region, is not only because I knew that best, But because I wanted the sharpness of that argument, I did not want that to be diluted by finding out what happens elsewhere. I knew there was a particular formation there, and it is not surprising that Gujarat is what it is. And I think for me, the idea of a very granular, very focused, very granular idea of a region is a very important one. I have continued to do that because I feel like sometimes you can say more interesting and more meaningful things by observing the little, the smaller one, right? And it can, so that happened in the burden of refuge. I think academics read it, people in Pakistan have read it, uh, but sometimes I feel like my own community has not read it. I think the other book, Unbordered Memories, this circulates a lot. I continue to receive messages from people who are making films on it or reading it or what have you. This has been much more circulable. I think the burden of refuge is a slightly uncomfortable argument, and maybe that hasn't, but it doesn't matter. I think I've been in the profession of books, teaching books, and I know that no author is ever completely happy. No publisher is perfect. So let's just accept that philosophically.
This is why I wanted you to speak about your work and how it has been received, because I was very curious to know how you see that reception, but I think I'll answer that question, my own question, much better. I think the idea of output versus outcome in knowledge systems is a very critical one. So output is not I wrote 2 books and 5 articles or 10 articles. Outcome is that there are new PhDs coming out of what we did. And what happens is outcome is also that the questions are changing. Probably there are scholars who do not need to, explain some, fundamentals, and they can build on their work. And I'll come to that because the next question is related to that. But regarding Nandita, what can I say about the way her work was received is my own experience. At first go, I had to keep the book aside every, 5 pages, 10 pages, and I gave up on it because it had so much information, so much stuff that I did not know. And with whatever we read about, say, the Sindhi experience of independence struggle, of independence movement, so I think what both your work has done is, give that sort of possibility that, look, this is a question, look, this needs examination, look, this needs, investigation, right? And I think that is the way in which one must recognize that this is how scholarship needs to be received and has been, received. I have 2 more questions, but the warning says that I should turn to the audience. And this, we can keep on chatting, but I think we should hear more. Huh?
My questions are less of a, question or interrogation. It's more of a confirmation from your side that, okay, this is a problem, or, this thing exists, being a Sindhi. So a little introduction, like I've been in Hyderabad for like last 1.5 years, and I have not met even one single Sindhi person. Okay. Also, the way Nida ma'am said that there is always a question of Hindu versus Muslim that comes up when we go on to introduce ourselves as Sindhis. So when we say them that we introduce somebody that okay, we are Sindhis and we do come, we came to India as a part of during the partition. So instantly they tell us that, oh, so you're Muslim, and we'll be like, it's just to say to Hinduism that we partitioned and you fellows are calling us Hindu. There is no hatred towards any religion or whatsoever, but then it just makes us feel that we are less of inclusive, or they don't include us. They are like rejecting us in a minute without knowing anything about us. So how do we think about that? It always gives a sense of rejection that, oh, they do not recognize me.
Can you summarize your question in short?
Like, how does one, already we have, what to say, identity crisis is a Sindhi. So the moment you introduce yourself that you're a Sindhi, and the very moment you're being rejected, I mean, oh, you just being labeled that you're a Muslim or this is what you are, or then how do you feel? How do you tackle with that? This is what I'm. This is what my question is.
Right. The question of identity crisis is a very serious one, and it should be the burden of refuge to come to terms with that. But over there.
Yeah, what I can quite understand what you mean by that lack of awareness in larger Indian society, especially in areas outside Western India. In Western India, Sindhis are still known, but say in the south or the east and so on, there would be less awareness of who Sindhis are as a community. And yes, I can quite understand how difficult it must be to deal with that. I really don't know what more to say. I mean, yeah. That's really unfortunate, but I mean, I guess at some point you just have to learn to have a sense which does not get affected so deeply by this.
The Sindhi school.
So which way?
Okay, so I work with scripts. The existing body of work or research in the script area is that people think technology will transcend script barriers. So that's one way. If there is some sort of transliteration software that can be made available, it exists. But how efficient it is, it needs to be trained on several other forms of data and so on and so forth. So the point is Devanagari is something that people are fighting for, people are championing the cause of, but it does not necessarily enjoy the state support in the sense Sahitya Academy publishes only in Perso Arabic. So a lot of these things need to be watched and observed. But at the informal space, a lot of interesting things are happening. There is this gentleman living in San Francisco Bay Area, Kamal Mirchandani, who is pushing for Romanized Sindhi. Right? So, because Sindhis in the south and Sindhis abroad do not understand the Devanagari script. So,
my question is to Nandita madam. My knowledge of Sindh and what happened during partition tells me that for a long time Sindh was still safe and there were no riots. While Punjab was burning and they were killing and all kind of horrible things happening, Sindh remained peaceful till the Muslims which had to migrate from India reached there and that started it all. From my from my wife's side, grandfather was from Sindh. So our understanding of Sindh has been of a very peaceful, business-oriented, work-oriented and tolerant people. How has that happened?
If the Sindhi Hindus leave, we will inherit their lands, their properties, their businesses and so on, But when the time came, these properties were distributed among the Muhajirs as evacuee properties, as they were done even on this side of the border, So the Sindhi Muslims did not benefit, number one. Number two, they felt that they were looking forward to Pakistan, which was homeland for the Muslims of South Asia. What they did not bargain on was that once Pakistan became almost entirely a Muslim majority country, then there was no Hindu enemy to target. And then within the larger Pakistani societies, ethnicities began to show up. Punjabi versus Bengali versus Sindhi versus Pashtun versus Muhajir versus Baloch. Okay. And in that dynamic, the Sindhi Muslims have found themselves to be very discriminated against by Muhajirs and by Punjabis, which has only reinforced their sense of Sindhi identity, which then shows up with Sindhi Hindus. Who is it? So that has also played a role. But yes, I have very dear friends who are Sindhi Muslims in Pakistan and elsewhere, and that warmth and that hospitality is unforgettable. Then would you know?
No, just echoing what Nandita said. In fact, earlier when Sony was also for, I think for both of us, and it's true of SARS as well here, they are the ones actually responding most to our work. They receive us with the kind of warmth and affection that I have not seen anywhere. Whether I meet a bunch of Sindhi or back in Pakistan, I think there, and it could be true between East Bengal and West Bengal, it could be true between East Punjab and West Punjab, but I particularly feel that the trans-border intimacy, especially between scholars and writers in the Sindhi community, is really quite unique. It is not to be, and that might help you, shed light on the past as well, which Nandita very rightly says is, by and large, Sindh was free of violence. By and large, the hostilities came from economic inequities. They were not forms of hatred about religion. In any case, to look at partition only through the lens of religion does not help us very much. We have to see it as something that has a long historical process, which is also lack certain kinds of asymmetries of power, and especially economic power, which are exacerbated by colonialism. So we need to understand this as a much larger process and not simply reduce it to interreligious hostility.
Yeah, Namaste and Jai Jhulelal. I'm Sangeeta Pamnani, Sindhi actually. I have been born and brought up in a Sindhi family with all the Sindhi tradition, culture, food, values, everything. And I am trying to put that across to my child also. Ours have been our oldest civilization, as you know, from Indus Valley civilization. It is very painful, as you said, when people don't recognize you, who Sindhi is, whom do you worship, where do you come from, and all that. And then, yes, we have to start from the scratch. I come from the oldest civilization, and during the partition, we also faced a lot of issues. My parents basically faced a lot of issues and everything. And that's really painful to again, start from the scratch and tell them about us, who we are and what we do. The Sindhi food, yes, definitely is popular somehow a little bit. When we go to North, we see that everybody's, celebrating Sindhi festivals, and they are together, united, and they actually, promote our food and everything. But unfortunately, in South, we don't see that happening much. So I just want to ask you a question: that how do we inspire the youth or the younger generation? Because somewhere there is an embarrassment when we speak our language. Mostly the Sindhis have switched on to Hindi and English. बहुत शर्म आती है उनको हमारी भाषा सिंधी बोलने में. आई डोंट नो क्यों, पता नहीं, क्योंकि हम जहाँ पे भी देखते हैं तेलुगु हो, गुजराती हो, मराठी, बंगाली, सब हमारे अपार्टमेंट में लिफ्ट में भी मिलते हैं तो दे स्पीक देयर ओन लैंग्वेज, एंड व्हिच आई फील लिटिल बैड अबाउट दैट. व्हाई आर वी नॉट टॉकिंग स्पीकिंग इंग्लिश?
लेकिन माफ कीजिएगा, आई थिंक वक्त काफ़ी कम है, तो पूरे आपके सब सवालों के जवाब तो हम नहीं दे पाएंगे, लेकिन
नहीं, मेरा एक ही सवाल है कि जो हमारी आने वाली जो पीढ़ी है, जो हमारे यूथ है, तो उनको हम लोग कैसे इंस्पायर या मोटिवेट करें ताकि वो हिंदी कल्चर को थोड़ा सा अपनाएं.
अगर आपको वो देखेंगे किताबें पढ़ते हुए, इसके बारे में सोचते हुए, उससे भी काफ़ी फर्क पड़ता है.
मैम, आई एम अ सिंधी प्रमोटर एक्चुअली. मैं अपने कोर्स सिंधी में करती हूँ, मेरा फूड का वो है, लेकिन इतना फर्क नहीं पड़ रहा है जितना पड़ना चाहिए एक्चुअली. तो मेरा यही सवाल होता है कि क्या कर सकते हैं इस बारे में.
I think this is an ongoing conversation, and probably if Hyderabad Literature Festival has done something like this to make the language visible, let's see if more such community building activities can be done so that people get familiar with Sindhi, and that makes our own youth of the community comfortable with the idea that wow, Sindhi as an anchor is somewhere. But of course, it's a conversation that's an ongoing one, and I'm afraid I'll have to end it here to make space for the next session and of course for lunch as well. But we should keep talking. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much for your questions and engagement. One more? Oh, just one more.
Sorry, I'll keep this really brief. Hello ma'am, Rita ma'am, as you have told that some of your students, they've written in admission forms that their mother tongue is Hindi even though they're Sindhi. So how do you look at the language imposition, the Hindi imposition, or rather the Hindi standardization debate? Because we South Indians, we have very strong opinions on that. But as Sindhis, how do you feel about that, in the other side of the peninsula? And my second question is about cuisine. Like Punjabi cuisine is a thing, like you find it in restaurants, Gujarati food is a thing. Why is Sindhi food not available in those many restaurants? Like I've eaten the food, it's pretty delicious. So maybe, if there are more restaurants, people will know more and more about the Sindhi community. And the Sindhi community is very entrepreneurial, that's what I've noticed, but why they haven't gone into the restaurant side?
Yeah, I think a lot more Sindhi food is showing up. A lot more. I think you try and type dal pakwan on Swiggy or Zomato, it will show up. You try and type Sindhi curry, it will show up now. There is far more than before. There are many young people on Instagram talking about Sindhi cuisine, memories, documenting, writing about it, making films. So there is a lot more, and this also answers your question. I think we will see in the coming years a lot more happening because I think there is a great deal of curiosity. But coming back to your previous question about, you're quite right. I mean, this is the situation that we were talking about would not happen in Tamil, right? Or to a Bangla speaking person. And I think that is the fracturedness of it, right? Because once you don't have a territory, you don't have a cohesion. Language requires a certain cohesion of intimacy, people living with each other, and that didn't happen. So yes, it is very, very sort of fractured, and you can't recover that fully, but you might recover its echoes. So that even if you don't speak the language, you might still have some echoes and resonances, and maybe it will begin to mean different things as to what it is to be a Sindhi. So, I mean, my daughter grew up in a Gujarati household, not speaking Sindhi, but uske zehen mein hai. It's there in somewhere, and I see every now and then she will respond to it. She knows what anger means in Sindhi because she has heard me, right? So I think language can assume sometimes different forms, and non-linguistic forms also sometimes can do that work. That subject requires a very big discussion, but that's all I can handle right now. I think we really need to wrap up. I'm saying this on behalf of the moderator, who's very sweet and polite, but I think
yeah, I thought we'll finish up the session. I think we are due for lunch. All the delegates, I request them to have their lunch in the delegates lounge. We have arranged lunch from Tales of Telugu. Our volunteer here, Janvi, will guide all the delegates for their lunch. We'll take a break and we'll reconvene at 2 o'clock, where the next literary stream session with Huma Qureshi and Kinera Murthy will begin. And thank you so much for this lovely session,
I just would like to end the session by reading a short verse. It's a poem by Prabhu Wafa, okay? And it really reflects this, Je ad baith ji hikdi sit, vei vichdi jaitha bi sit, tuti vyo bin kaflan jo sang, juda thela ang kha ang. I'll read the English version now. One limb is separated from the other, like a line from half a verse separated from the other line. Two poems forced to part company. One limb is separated from the other. Thank you.